Teddy Talks.
Welcome to Teddy Talks After Hours, and this is where we pause, rewind, and unpack each episode. And of course, there's puns in it because it's Teddy Talks. But this is really for the grown-ups. Maybe you've dropped off the kids at school, or maybe they're off to bed. But right now, we're going to talk straight up to the parents and educators out there listening. So I'm here with Leslie Priscilla, our guest on Teddy Talks today. Leslie, for those who don't yet know about your work, can you share a little bit about your organization?
Yeah, of course. I'm the founder of an organization called Latinx Parenting, which I started back in 2018. And my goal is really to support parents, all parents, but namely Latino, Latina, and Latinx parents, with knowing how to bridge our culture with some of the things that we know now about attachment and child development, and just be able to give resources to parents to raise their children in a way that is rooted in culture and also aligned with what the kids need.
And if there's a place that a parent or educator out there is interested in going to find out more, you want to shout out an Instagram, a website? What you got for me?
Yeah, they can go to our website, which is latinxparenting.org, Latinx parenting.org, or they can visit our Instagram, which is just at Latinx Parenting.
Fantastic. I encourage everyone out there to have a look. So, as you know, here on the after show, we're going to pause, rewind, and unpack. So, we're going to pause first. Let's say this episode was all about welcoming and belonging for immigrant families and celebrating cultural diversity. So, in this episode, Grizzle and Grizzlette were trying to help Miguel, the child who wants to make friends in the new country, but he doesn't speak English. So, why is this topic of belonging and celebrating cultural differences important to you personally?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the episode that my parents were both Mexican immigrants. They came here. My mom came here when she was 14 years old. My dad came here when he was a little bit older, in his mid 20s. And they have shared with me a lot of the challenges that they experienced assimilating and trying to figure out where they fit in. And they didn't come here when they were very young, which, Miguel is younger than I think they were when they came here. But I know that it can be really challenging, and it's not just challenging for the child that comes here or the adolescent that comes here. It's also potentially challenging for kids that are trying to be welcoming and don't really know how.
I'm glad you brought that up. So we do have a lot to learn from kids and their sort of native kindness, I think, that emerges. I'll just tell you a quick anecdote, and then I would love to hear your reflection on that. So my daughter learned that, and she's in fourth grade, she learned that they were going to get a new student from Pakistan. And so I was like, oh, well, tell me more about that. And she's like, well, I really, you know, want to make them feel welcome. What could I do? And I was like, well, what are your ideas? And she made this little bracelet for like Taylor Swift style, right?
Yeah.
For the new student. And then she's like, let's go on Duolingo and figure out how to say welcome. And it was really like a wonderful moment. And I can just imagine how a student coming into a brand new class, brand new country, doesn't speak English, would receive that. So can you just like tell me a little bit about like what can we learn from kids about welcoming?
I think kids are very naturally welcoming. I think that they are driven for connection, and I don't think that it's, something that is hard for them necessarily to have ideas about how to connect. I think initially it could make them a little nervous if they've never done it before. But again, I think that they're natural connectors. I think that they laugh at the same things. I think that they, can embody empathy in ways that maybe adults might, think it through with their brains a little bit. Kids are a little bit better at feeling things with their heart. And so if a child is crying, that might stimulate empathy for them. If a child is laughing, that might make them laugh as well. And so I think for kids, it really is more natural than it is for a lot of adults, because adults have grown up with a lot of ideas about immigrants or about people that come here from other countries that haven't necessarily made their way down to the kids yet. And so I think we can learn a lot from kids about how to approach people that are, seemingly unfamiliar or speak different languages. I mean, we can oftentimes take their lead.
Yeah, and it's sort of like we talked about in the episode where the Teddy twins were brainstorming ways with you to, reach out and connect with Miguel in maybe nonverbal ways and playing games together and things like that. Let's rewind the episode even a little bit more. So they learned, in this Teddy talk to, welcome immigrants with kindness, compassion, and patience, and that we actually have a lot to learn from each other. Do you think that message of celebrating and bridging differences that we talked about in today's show is one that most parents out there listening received when they were young?
I think that because there have been so many changes to the social landscape, we have so many immigrants here. Actually, we have about 30% of every child will be some kind of Latinx by the year 2050. And so I think that the more that this population grows and other populations of immigrants also, not just from Latin America, we are really being invited to try to understand the ways to be more welcoming. And I don't think that we often had those conversations as children. I definitely did because, again, my parents are immigrants, but I think that people who maybe didn't have that experience in their families growing up might feel a little bit at a loss for knowing how to approach it with their kids. And I think that this is an exciting thing, actually. I don't think that this is a scary thing. I think that there's so much potential to even being curious and seeking how to learn how to talk to kids about this, the immigration experience and how to be more welcoming.
Yeah, and that's really what we're trying to do here at Teddy Talk is, our motto is big ideas for little ears. So, a lot of times parents, they want to talk to their kids about things like immigration, about welcome and belong, but they don't necessarily have the words at the ready to share with their kids. So that's hopefully what we're bringing to the world through Teddy Talks. Let's rewind this episode a little bit more and maybe even rewind even further back to when you were little. Um, Knowing now what you know, and you have an organization and you have a lot of experience and you have kids yourself, like what advice do you wish your younger self knew about belonging, honoring cultural diversity and the immigrant experience?
I'm so glad you asked that because I really was Miguel and I wasn't an immigrant child, but my parents were immigrants and they actually didn't speak English to me. I learned English in preschool. So I remember walking into preschool and sitting down with children and not understanding what they were saying. I quickly picked it up, I think, within the first year. But I remember as a child just feeling very unsure kind of where I landed. And my parents were always very great about ensuring that I was going to preserve my language, our culture, etc. I think even as I began to understand the English language and be able to communicate it, there was still a part of me that never felt like I was fully fitting in. And so I had to know how to connect with others in a way that was not necessarily dependent on the language, but really just dependent on the things that we talked about in the episode.
Yeah, so you're
Um,
saying that when you were little, learning the language was the first thing, and then as you got older, it became a little bit more difficult for you.
yeah. So as I got older, even though I did speak the language, I still struggled to know how I was going to fit in. I think it really helped that a lot of the other kids around me at the time as I was growing up had that same experience where their parents were immigrants. And it wasn't until I got to high school that I recognized how different my experience had been from a lot of my other peers. A lot of the peers in my high school were not Spanish speakers, which is very different from the kids that I grew up around. And so I started to kind of figure out what my place was, where I felt safe, where I didn't necessarily feel safe either, and really found belonging in other people that had shared and lived experiences. But it didn't necessarily mean that I was disconnected from others who didn't. It just meant that I recognized that there was a safety with people who understood where I was coming from, understood what my lived experience was, because maybe they had that same experience growing up with parents who were immigrants, or I felt safe with people who were curious about me, right? And who wanted to know more about Mexico and who were willing to kind of engage with me in ways that were a little bit more profound and more culturally honoring.
And I think that's why, as a school psychologist, I've worked in everything from preschool all the way up to high school. And that's why it's so wonderful when there's affinity spaces where they have groups for understanding other cultures or groups where immigrant families can come together and really have that shared community and belonging. Let's unpack the episode just a little bit even more. So at Teddy Talks, we share big ideas for little ears, but fun fact, we actually have a lot of adult listeners as well. Often co-listening happens, and I really want to, you know, in sharing your story, as a parent myself, and there are going to be experiences in which there's a new student in the classroom or a new family moves into the neighborhood or things like that. What is one thing you want Big Ears listeners to know about how to talk to their kids about the immigrant experience? We'll start with how do you talk to maybe families like mine who are, in the US already, and for the immigrants coming in, like how do you want them to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that it's really powerful to model humility. in this. And so when kids have questions, it's okay to say, I'm not sure, right? I don't really know a lot about this culture. I don't really know about this country that your friend is from. Let's learn together. And so I really encourage parents to kind of initiate that in a partnership with the child, right? We don't necessarily have to know everything. I think it's really helpful to ask the questions with the kids and actually do some of the research, watch some YouTube videos, maybe go visit a Mexican restaurant, maybe go visit a Persian restaurant, whatever it is, right? Some kind of different food celebration. Luckily, where I live, there's a lot of different kinds of cultural celebrations. Every year, there's an international street fair where we get to taste all kinds of different foods. And so I think music, food, all of these things are different ways to kind of dip our toes into different cultures. And again, it really is just very important for parents to be humble about how they approach this, right? Because there's not one perfect way to do it, but I think that it's okay to model that curiosity, to model that humility, and to say, I'm not sure, let's find out together.
Yeah, so everyone can tap into their inner Mr. Rogers, who always said, when you wonder, you're learning. Do you have any advice for the adult listeners out there who perhaps are immigrants themselves and have children who are assimilating into the culture?
Yeah, I think something that you said earlier was really important is to find those affinity spaces. For example, in my city, we have a Centro Cultural de Mexico, which is a cultural center that's specific to Mexican people. And so I think that oftentimes people don't know that those centers exist. And I think that it's very important for us to have more of those actually, because that's the only one that I know of. And so if there is an immigrant parent, I would really encourage you to find the community. There is community. I think something that happens often, and that definitely happened for my parents, was that as we were navigating, as they were navigating and, experiencing acculturation, it can be a very isolating experience. It can feel really lonely. And that's normal, right? It's a normal thing to, when you experience displacement, to find yourself in, in a situation where you might feel more alone. And so I would encourage people, parents, anybody to find those affinity spaces. And if they don't exist, there is someone else looking for them. And so that's kind of why I created Latinx Parenting, is because this didn't exist before. And so I want parents to take initiative and create their own affinity spaces to find community and to ensure that they have a group of people that they can relate to.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's really sound advice. Now, one of the things that we like to do here on Teddy Talks is we also, I don't know if you noticed, like to have a little fun. Play is also learning in addition to wondering. So we'd love to end this with our very big bonus question. Did you know that Grizzlette was actually my childhood bear? And I went down a deep, deep, deep rabbit hole to find a orange chair to match. Grizzle was my sister's bear. And so we had a lot of great play together. Play is a wonderful language of a child. So now it's story time. Do you remember having a favorite item from childhood, like a childhood teddy bear or a lovey? Tell us a
I
story.
I do. So when I was 3, I had a doll. Her name was Clara. And one day my mom and I went to the mall and I left her somewhere and I didn't know where she was. I remember going all over the mall. I remember crying really hard because she was my favorite. And then I didn't find her and I was very, very sad. And one day my mom and I were shopping at a secondhand store. We were shopping at the Goodwill. And suddenly I found another doll that looked very much like Clara. It wasn't exactly, but it was very much like her. And I was 4 years old. I remember this. I documented it in my brain. I was like, I'm 4 years old and I'm finding my doll. And I named her Sarah, which sounded like Clara. And ever since, I still have her. I still, have her actually in my office. In the background of some of my workshops, you can see her. And now I see her more as like a representation of my inner child. And in my work, I talk a lot about inner child work. And I do encourage parents to connect with an item from their childhood, whether it's a doll, a grizzlette, right? Some kind of item, because it really does put us in that space of honoring that inner child. And so I still have Sarah. She's been with me since I was 4. So that's, oh my gosh, 33 years. And yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I don't think I've ever brought her into conversation in this way.
I would love for you to bring her into a photo for us so that we can share this beautiful doll and representing the inner child. And I really want to thank you for being a part of this, because a lot of what we do at Teddy Talks is about reparenting. There's a lot of messages that we didn't receive, in previous generations that now we can own for ourselves, but then also give that gift to our children. And you've given such a beautiful gift today for all the Miguels out there and all the families who are welcoming families here in the US. So thank you for all of the wonderful work you do. And everyone else, thank you. We'll see you all on the next episode of Teddy Talks.